I recently made a video telling you the 6 things I don't like about my top of the range Red Sea Reefer S-850. So today I'm going to make the happy version of that video and I'll tell you the 5 things I like most about this rather sexy glass box. I'm going to warn you straight away though, some of the things I love about this tank are pretty nerdy, so you're going to want to put on an anorak while you're watching this video. Let's get stuck in. First up is the design and premium looks. Now my last Red Sea tank felt really well put together and nicely built, but the S-850 is much nicer. Now don't get me wrong, I am all about the fish and corals, and at the end of the day, the tank is just a piece of furniture, but I actually enjoyed coming into my living room just to perv on the empty tank when I first got it. The gloss white cabinet and glass tank are the things that stand out of course, but there are a few other more subtle areas that make the tank look so nice. Firstly, there's a thin metal shelf that sticks out beyond the cabinet frame and sits just under the front glass panel. That creates a small gap between the cabinet and the tank, which gives a bit of separation and makes it look like the tank is floating just above the cabinet. And unlike all other tanks I've had, the cabinet isn't just one interrupted panel all the way to the floor and has a little recessed area at the bottom which just breaks up the look a little and makes it look a bit more stylish. Then there's the black framing you get around the display tank. Red Sea used black silicone and there's a double pane of glass at the top and bottom that completes the frame look. Now to be honest, I wasn't sure that I'd like that when I first ordered the tank, but in the flesh it looks really classy and gives the tank a bit more presence. Away from the tank itself, and the sump area is really nicely designed too. The plumbing is nice and tidy and looks great wrapped neatly along the back of the cabinet, and don't tell me I didn't warn you this would get nerdy, but the red pipes just look fantastic. And I have a Bubble King skimmer and a Red Sea filter roller that are red, white and black, which really complements the look too. And while I will lose any last shred of street cred I have by saying this, I think the whole sump area looks really cool and I love the colour matching kit. Delving even deeper into Nerdsville then, and the second thing I love is the sump extension and dry section of the cabinet. No matter how big the cabinet is on any reef tank, I always need more space, and the dry section of this tank is a really good size. Now you can see I've crammed in a ton of shiz there already with 24 plug sockets and an IKEA SCADIS rack on the door to hold what Mrs. Reef Talk affectionately calls miscellaneous fish tank crap. And if you wanted to, you could remove the sump extension and block off the pipes, which would double the dry space for even more equipment. And that would be particularly useful if you have large aquarium controllers or auto testers, or of course just more miscellaneous fish tank crap. However, instead of that, I've set the sump extension up so it's ready to become a frag tank, which was actually one of the main reasons I went for this tank over some of the other options. I already have frag racks in place, a single power head at one end, and an AI blade LED light fixed to the roof of the cabinet, so it's nicely out of the way. And I plan to settle all of my frags here when the corals from the main display get too big. Now I have tried setting up an in-sump frag tank before, but it just got in the way, so it's really nice to have a decent sized section of the sump dedicated to frags that is completely out of the way of the main sump. And at number 3 we have 2 features that make algae scraping easier. Every tank I've had before this has been rimless, which looks great, but it means you get salt creep and water splashing over the top of the glass if you turn your power heads up too high, or if you don't go very slowly with the algae scraper along the top of the glass. But the brace on this tank means you never get water splashing over the top, and so you can go nice and fast with the algae scraper without dripping water over the top and down the front of the tank. And while that might sound like a small thing, it's actually a really nice quality of life improvement that just takes away a bit of faff. And the second thing that makes algae scraping easier is that the seams have little plastic guards on them, so you don't need to worry about bashing into the silicone when you get to the end of your glass with your algae scraper. Now as far as I'm aware, you get armoured seams like that on all G2 Red Sea Reefer tanks now, but the brace at the top of the tank is only available on the S series, and it's one of my favourite things about the tank. And the penultimate thing I love is the dimensions of the tank. The S series tanks come in lengths of 4, 5, 6 or 7 foot, and most other tanks of that length are 2 feet front to back. But all S series tanks are 68 centimetres or 2 foot 3 inches front to back. And you know what the really great thing about having an extra 3 inches is? No, not that, mind out of the gutter please. It's that it gives you more space to put your aquascape, which means your rockwork doesn't need to be at a steep angle, and that you'll have more room both in front and behind of your scape. For my scape, that allows me to have a good couple of inches behind the rockwork for flow and fish to get around, and a load of space in front of it to create negative space while still having enough room to put a few corals on the sandbed. The S-Series tanks are also 65 centimeters or 2 foot 2 inches tall, which is slightly taller than average, which firstly makes this tank look a bit better proportioned, but it also gives you more height for additional coral real estate, which I've taken advantage of by adding these Weirbox coral mounts that I sell on my Etsy store, reefdork.etsy.com. And the final thing I love is the diaphragm valve, although I'm going to correct myself straight away because love is far too strong a word for a valve, even on a nerdfest list like this. However, my last Red Sea tank was a Gen 1 and so had the Gen 1 diaphragm valve, which was absolute hot garbage. Now for those of you who don't know, the point of that valve is to allow you to make fine adjustments so the water level in the Weirbox isn't too low, which means the water in your tank will gurgle, and isn't too high, which means the water would go down the emergency overflow all the time. And you could only adjust the Gen 1 valve in clicks, not smoothly, so it was nigh on impossible to get the bastard water level right. The Gen 2 diaphragm though is a big improvement. It's now completely smooth so you can make really fine adjustments. And as well as that, the main drain pipe is also wider than on the Gen 1 tanks, which means any adjustments you do make have a smaller impact on the water level, which in turn helps you make the micro adjustments you need to. And as a Brucey bonus, they've moved the valve from the back of the cabinet right to the front so it's dead easy to access, which means I no longer bash my big bald head on the roof of the cabinet when I need to adjust the valve. Now if I'm honest, I was sceptical of the valve at first, and I think I'd still just about prefer to have a standard gate valve like you get on Waterbox and K tanks, but having had this for almost a year now, the Gen 2 Red Sea diaphragm has been totally fine so far, and I no longer dread the thought of having to adjust it like I did with the Gen 1 valve. Now I originally wrote this video as a top 7 list, but there were 2 things I decided to cut. The first of those is the aluminium frame, which is reassuringly sturdy and solid, but I took that off the list after seeing a custom tank with an even more solid looking aluminium structure that made me think that if anything, Red Sea should have gone for thicker aluminium. And secondly, while I do really like the Sump layout and it has plenty of space for pretty much everything I need, the central support and gap on either side wastes 4 inches of space that could have been used for a bigger sump, and we've already established how I feel about losing a few inches. Now I was given this tank for free of course, so feel free to take what I say with a pinch of salt, but ultimately the S-Series tanks really are a noticeable step up from other Red Sea tanks, and while they're very expensive, I don't think you'd be disappointed if you have the extra cash to spare. With all that being said though, it's not all good, so if you want to know the bad things, you can watch this video next, after clicking the like and subscribe buttons of course, and while I can't promise that video is any less nerdy, there are some things that are well worth knowing about if you're thinking of buying an S-Series tank.